share my screen. Bear with me, sorry. There we go, share screen. That's down. Technical hitch, sorry everybody. And then this. Tracy, what can you see at the moment?
Sorry, Ali, we can see your PowerPoint. Yep, we can see it. Fantastic. Yes, it's there, yeah.
Woohoo! Brilliant. Okay. Right, so hello everybody. It's really good to see so many of you from hopefully the 3 key agencies. So we should have people here from police, from health and from social care, which is great because you are the 3 key agencies and you all have a joint and equal role in safeguarding children. So that's really who we were aiming to do today so that's brilliant. So as Tracy said, I'm Ali Hassi. I'm head of children's safeguarding. So within my service, within the local authority, I have all the conference chairs and the independent reviewing officers and the LADOs sitting in my service as well. Essentially, we have a role of supporting and challenging. So if you've got children on child protection plan or children who are looked after, you'll come across my staff there. So for my role particularly, it's around supporting effective communication between agencies. So I'm talking with Caroline, with Holly and their colleagues fairly regularly on a daily basis. It's about ensuring effective safeguarding processes and networking across different agencies. As well as that, I am co-chair with Anthony Douglas of the SSP case review panel. Right, I think that was where I wanted to go with that. Now let's see if I can get it onto the next slide. Got the wrong date there, sorry, that was the original date we wanted to do. Okay, so as Tracy has said, this is a webinar that we wanted to do about neglect. The driver for this was very much a serious case review that was published just before Christmas. And it was regarding a case of 4 siblings who died in a house fire in Staffordshire about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago now. There was a 5th child who survived along with the parents of the children. Tracy sent out the link to the serious case review, which you may or may not have read, and that's fine either way, but I would urge you to have a look at it so that you can see the themes that came out of that review, and they will resonate with you as we're talking through this morning. So it was a serious case review that influenced this webinar, and we felt it was a great opportunity to take the learning in Suffolk, as although this did happen in another authority, the themes are applicable for us and for any other local authority too. So I just want to give credit to Joanna Nichols, who was the overview writer for the serious case review. Okay, so this is a family that could be anywhere in the country. And as I've just said, it will resonate with you. The themes will resonate with you. You'll think about families that you're working with, and they sound like many other families that you work with. When I was a frontline practitioner back 15, 20 years ago, as I was reading through it, I can still think of families that I worked with back then. So the practitioners who were working with this family talked to the overview writer about the children being unremarkable because of the risk factors that were listed, and they're in there. So mental health, substance misuse and domestic violence were largely absent, although there was one alleged incident of domestic abuse. So the practitioners described them as being just an ordinary and unremarkable family, as many families are who we work with. Just of note, though, there are some interesting thoughts towards the back end of the serious case review, because the dad was described as quiet and mild and gentle and shy, and the mum was described as loud and domineering and feisty. So just think about what we may have thought if that was the other way around, if the dad was all those loud, aggressive things and the mum was meek and mild. Sorry about the background noise, hear the birds in the trees. So this is not a family who stood out in any way to services and the practitioners who are working with them. Right, so at the time of the children's deaths in February 2019, the children were aged 8, 6, 4 and 3. There was a 2-year-old surviving sibling, and all 5 of these children were subject to child protection plans under neglect when they died. So they were young children, but they were old enough to have been known to agencies for a number of years, and there was lots of information available and was held by agencies about this family. Okay, so within the review, the agreed themes of the review were, as they said there, as it says there, so professional understanding, in particular around holistic working, drift and delay in cases, the mental capacity of the parents, special educational needs, large families, and again, you guys will all know that we've got...
Hello, my name's DS Naomi Hart. I'm calling from Suffolk Police. Hello, I was hoping to speak to your adult rape.
Oh, don't know what happened there. Tracy, are you all with me still?
Yes, we're all with you. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with that one. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I think someone's gone on mute now.
Okay, fantastic. Right. Okay, so large families. You guys will all be working with large families in Suffolk. It's a feature that we see. It's a feature that we see with children on child protection plans. So also they wanted to look at the professional acceptance of how parents controlled the terms of engagement with all agencies, the balance between risk to the child and support given to the parents to meet the children's needs. And the review talks about where's the line, where is enough, where do you stop the support to parents when it's just not working, and recognise that a line has been reached. The review also looked at the child's experience and thinking about what is it like for a child living in this family. And we know we ask that too, we talk about that too. What's the child's experience like? And the family history. So whilst we want to build on the strengths a family may have, we don't want to lose sight of what's gone on before. And this must always feature within assessments. And again, these are features that must resonate with us and for families that we will have worked with. And I'm sure you'll already be thinking of families that you're working with as we're working through this. Okay, so what the author, Joanna Nichols, says is, and she very correctly points out that the themes from across the country tend to be very similar with serious case reviews. And professionals are working with families whose issues are often very complex. And we're working with individuals who can be very unpredictable as well. She talks about how we're working with families at a time of increasing poverty, which makes it harder to parent, and not to mention obviously right now, coming off the back of hopefully, anyway, fingers crossed, COVID, that will have affected families and everybody in a variety of different ways. She talks about that you can't remove the risk in every single case. And she points out that if issues were easy, solutions would be simple to find. But agencies need to ensure that their staff understand and can assess what the risks will be for children and what action must be taken. But this is not easy work. We all have to acknowledge that. Okay. Right. So there were 3 findings in the review. There can be a fundamental lack of understanding of the impact of neglect on children. There can be a lack of understanding of the child's lived experience in Staffordshire, and there can be a lack of understanding of the importance of family history. I've put Staffordshire in brackets because that's what the report says, but we can debate this in Suffolk too. So we know that about 60% of children subject to child protection plans here in Suffolk are under the category of neglect. So what's that going to mean for children as they grow up and when they become adults? Is there going to be a lasting impact? And what will it mean for any children that they parent in the future? What experience are these children going to draw upon as they become parents themselves? So for those of you who've read the report already, you'll see that the author spends by far the most amount of her time, and the review is on that analysis of that first point. But in terms of the child's experience, the author refers to the role played by the dad in this case, It was apparent that he did most of the care and he held most of the insight. But this mum was loud and she dominated conversations. And therefore, professionals paid most attention to what she said about how things were for the children. So how do we avoid falling into that trap too? How do we make sure that we bring dads into the assessment, whether they're in the home or present but more invisible, or anyone else who has a caring role? How do we make sure that they all feature in the assessment? Family history, again, much less is said about this finding, but it is noted how the mother didn't speak to nor play with her children. She didn't know how to, and I'm not sure she actually felt it was important to do so either. But although her history was known, it didn't inform the practice. So services knew what it was like for her growing up. They knew her maternal aunt and her mother, but it didn't inform the practice how it should have done. So how can we make sure that we learn from that history and take forward and understand that if it happened there, what's happened to change how she was parented. Okay. Right. So this slide for me is really keen, and it's not about scaremongering, but it's really key, really important. I think you'll hear it repeated from Holly and Caroline as well. So these are quotes that are taken from a Department for Education analysis of serious case reviews that was undertaken by Brandon et al. And what's said in there, and it's used in the serious case review, is there is a need to understand more about neglect, which is present in more than 60% of serious case reviews and has been a constant theme across all of the serious case reviews studies. And that neglect is not only harmful, but it can also be fatal, and should be part of any practitioner's mindset. And again, that's not to scaremonger, because the vast majority of the children that we will work with are not going to go on and die. But that phrase is something to keep in the back of your mind when you are working with a family. And neglect should be treated with as much urgency as any other category of maltreatment. So if nothing else is taken away from this short presentation, then please do take away those thoughts and those quotes. So these children died from a fire, but there were concerns about neglect. And look how highly it features in serious case reviews. That's well over half. And the author says neglectful care, as well as being damaging to a child's development and their well-being, physical as well as emotional development, it can be an indicator of potential physical danger to the child. Okay. So the author of this serious case review, she lists the areas where she identifies that neglect occurred. So she talks about medical, and obviously Caroline will talk more about that in a moment. And she picks up on the children not attending their appointments, they weren't brought. And this is both medical and nutritional appointments. This is now recognised as a safeguarding concern. And again, Caroline will talk about it, but we refer to was not brought, because obviously a child can't get themselves there. So nutritional neglect, this mother said that the children were eating more fruit and veg, but that needs to be tested out. That needs to be tested out with the children if they're old enough to ask them. But that didn't happen in this case. So again, something we can take from that. Don't just hear what the mother is saying or the parent. Test it out, triangulate that information. Emotional neglect. We know that the mum didn't know how to play with her children, so they simply weren't played with or even spoken to. Educational. The mother had been reluctant to send her child number 2 to nursery, but nobody had explored with the parents and why they didn't want the younger children to go, although by perseverance they did eventually attend. But physical neglect, things like the clothes and the shoes were either too big or too small, nappies not being changed frequently enough. And the review talks of the mother being advised to wean child number 4 from his bottle. And she would give examples of how she was following advice. But again, this wasn't tested out. Her word was just essentially taken. So what's important to remember here and to see here as I'm talking through, each of these areas on their own perhaps are not overly alarming, but it's the cumulative impact of all of these things happening together that identifies the significant harm. So how are we going to make sure we're capturing that? How are we going to see that? Okay. So further evidence of the neglect for these children were the younger children being harmed by the older children, and on some occasions quite badly. So what does this mean about the terms of the level of supervision the children had? Was it happening in front of the parents? Were they not there? Those things needed to be explored and understood. We also know that the mother lied to the social worker, at least about one of the injuries that one of the children had. And we know that because she told the paediatrician that she had lied. And Caroline and Holly are going to pick out professional curiosity and talk about that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so as I've already alluded to, there was evidence within the review that the mother was listened to rather than looking at the evidence. And again, if you've had the opportunity to read the actual review, you'll see it covers quite a lot of ground. Although the mother wasn't really doing the parenting because she was loud, it was her who was really listened to. She also had PR for all 5 of the children, whereas the dad only had PR for 3 of the children. So so the evidence is that practitioners were just listening to what the mother said. So for example, the evidence was that the children reeked of smoke, but the mother said that they weren't smoking indoors. She said they were smoking outside, but the children still really stank. She told the paediatrician that one of the children spoke more at home when the paediatrician questioned why the child wasn't speaking, but no one had ever heard this child. But this mother's word was still believed, rather than again going with the evidence that no one's heard the child. This mother absolutely would not hear that these children were neglected, and according to the report, she still doesn't accept to this day that her children were neglected. So what does this mean for how this mother or any other parent is going to respond to concerns? What does this mean for her capacity or her motivation to make changes? If she doesn't believe there's a problem in the first place, how hard is she really going to try to make any changes? The author notes that there wasn't a tool used to help to gather evidence that would assist practitioners see what was actually happening for the family, and also help them to see that this mother didn't really believe that fundamentally there was a problem in terms of neglect. So in Suffolk, we've got the graded care profile too as a tool for intervention. And once it's used, it needs to be revisited so you can see the changes, and the family can see the changes that have been made, whether they're good or bad. But we need to repeat it, not just use it once, but to revisit it. That's really important. And then the progress or lack of can be more easily measured. So it's not just about gathering evidence to step to the next level. It's about using that information that you've gathered within the tool to see how things have changed for the family. So for this family, the professionals recognised there was no progress being made on the child protection plan for the children, but was the severity of the harm recognised and the long-term damage that was being caused. And again, when you read the report, you'll see that the author spends quite a bit of time discussing that. So that's really, really key too. Okay, so there were two issues that triggered a child protection response: the one alleged DV incident and some injuries to the children, but the neglect never did. And this is so important. So health are the third safeguarding partner, and we must bring health colleagues into the strategy discussions when discussing a threshold for significant harm and considering the impact of chronic neglect on a child. And this is not simply about booking an appointment with a paediatrician or just to hear the health history. So I'd ask you to be conversant with Working Together 2018 and what it says in there that health practitioners should be doing, which is to advise about the appropriateness or otherwise of medical assessment. So use our health colleagues, and health colleagues tell us what we need to do, what we need to be doing, which kind of assessment is going to be the most appropriate for whatever the concerns are. And also explain the benefits that arise from assessing previously unmanaged health matters that may be further evidence of neglect or maltreatment. And there's more in Working Together. about the health role in a strategy discussion. Page 43 of the recently factually updated one, or page 41 of Working Together, 2018. So bring colleagues, health colleagues in to discuss. And that's equally where there may be a change following an initial visit by police and social care to a family. If you're thinking, not quite sure that we need that health appointment now, what's really important is that you bring health back into that conversation to make that decision. And it's not just, we're going to cancel the appointment. Bring them back in, have that three-way discussion again, to decide if it is needed or not. Do that together. Also really important that the family history is provided to the person undertaking the medical assessment. And again, you'll see in the report when you read it, or you may have read it already, that the paediatrician said very clearly that a timeline chronology would have been very beneficial to help understand the number of injuries that these children had had. Okay, all right, so as already discussed previously, this is a mum who didn't see there was a problem and certainly didn't recognise that said problem as neglect. So an issue was apparent whilst this review was being undertaken, that not all visits to the family by social care took place when they should have done, and those that did happen were not written up. And the mother herself said that she saw a social worker infrequently. So the learning is that they wanted the mother to see the seriousness of the concerns, but then didn't maintain their statutory duty to visit and intervene with this family. So what underlying message would that have given to this mum? If she was already thinking this wasn't serious, by us not visiting, or social care not visiting, that's only going to compound that message to her. Mum raised it with the social workers and they told her that they didn't have the staff. And she just thought that there were families in greater need than hers were. So all contributing to her truth that her children were okay and it wasn't really a problem. Okay, so this is complex work. We know it's complex work and there are lots of challenges when working with families. But to identify neglect, a broad view of the family needs to be taken. Don't just look at the issue that's in front of you, and that's for all of us, all agencies. Don't just deal with the thing that's being presented to you. Have that overarching look. Can be tricky, and we know that professionals are often limited by time and scope. And families will hide what's happening. They're not always going to be honest with us. And we're going to see different thresholds across agencies as well as another challenge for us all. And what should happen when the care is not good enough, when it is deemed bad enough to change the plan? These are all things that are quite complex and not straightforward. So we've got to be curious. We've got to have professional curiosity, got to dig in, got to dig under. And again, I know my colleagues are going to talk about that in more detail in a moment. Personal views will undoubtedly fall into this as well. These are all tough challenges. It's a conundrum. And now we've got COVID as well to deal with in all of this. Another challenge is when we don't understand a parent's motivation, and we need to make sure that we explore that, what their motivation to change is it there? Okay, so the author refers to Brandon and colleagues, I talked about this earlier on, and how serious case reviews across the country often find the death of a child was not predictable. But they do show that the risk of accidental harm was high. And Brandon talks about there being some forewarning to an event. So why do professionals not see an urgency with neglect as a form of abuse? It could be that neglect is rarely the primary and immediate cause of death, even though it is so incredibly prevalent in serious case reviews. Often people who neglect their children have their own set of adversities, and you'll know that from working with the parents, that they've got their own set of problems. And could it be that practitioners become too focused upon supporting the parent and lose sight of the child and the impact of maltreatment? And you may have other thoughts around this as to why the cases of neglect are not seen perhaps with the same urgencies as physical abuse, for example. Okay. Last slide. Okay, so it's a tough job. We're dealing with individuals who can be unpredictable. It's wearing for you as professionals, and we don't always have as much time as we would like to reflect and digest. Obviously, right now, it's been more challenging working at home for some of us and away from our teams, where you can be around your colleagues and bounce around thoughts when you've come back from difficult visits. So hopefully there's been some snippets in there that have been really useful for you. It's Caroline who's going to be next, talking to you from a health perspective. And as I said at the beginning, you may hear some of the same points, but that's because these are the ones that we all picked out as being the key things that we wanted you to think about and to hear. So thank you for listening. I'll hand over now to Caroline. If I can get this off the screen.
Thank you, Ali. I'll try my IT skills now and see if I can get my presentation to share. Just while I'm doing that, as Ali said, my name's Caroline Holt and I'm a designated nurse safeguarding children, and I work for the 2 Suffolk CCGs. We're a part of safeguarding team, so I work alongside a colleague who specialises in looked after children, and one of my colleagues leads for the child death review process in Suffolk. And I can't find my presentation. Just bear with me. Okay, is that on the screen?
It is, Caroline, yeah.
Yeah, and can
It is,
everybody hear? Can everybody hear me? So obviously I can't see anybody at the moment. So it's
you, Caroline. Yes, it's fine.
okay. Perfect. Yeah. So thank you. So yes, thank you, Ali. As she said, this part of the presentation looks at health's role when identifying and responding to the impact of neglect. And as Ali has said, there is some duplication here with both Ali and the police's presentation, but we felt it really important to keep it in as it reiterates the message and supports the tripartite response from the 3 partners. Apologies, my slides are quite wordy, but I've really just left them in there because it will cover what I'm going to talk about and just act as an aid for me. And I'm not going to go through them word by word, and I'm not sure if they're going to be shared afterwards, but Tracy will update us at the end. So when I'm talking about the role of health in this presentation, I'm referring to many of the places where children and young people will be seen. So that covers acute hospitals, in A&E, outpatient clinics, maternity services for mums and their unborn, inpatients, dietitians, speech and language therapists, the mental health provider, GP surgery, their practice nurses there that will see families too, health visitors, school nurses. Children, young people are seen at turning point, sexual health clinics, as well as by the ambulance service out of hours and the 111 service. So within health, we all play a key role in keeping children safe. Oh, I can't get my slides to. Any top tips on how to get a slide to move to the next one? So firstly, like Ali, I wanted to acknowledge the current climate and the difficulties due to COVID. Within health, practitioners not seeing children face to face as much anymore. We've got a reduction in home visits and access to clinics. GPs are often offering telephone consultation, and there's reduced offers of services, all affecting the ability to see and observe children. And we know the risk of hidden harm is potentially increasing as children have not been seen for many months, including in the education and nursery setting. The impact of poverty, as we've said, is increasing. And we know that neglect often occurs where there are other problems, such as parental substance misuse, domestic abuse, and mental health problems. But despite the current climate and restrictions, professionals still need to assess the risk and with the evidence take action. As Ali has said, serious case reviews, such as the one that she talked about, most commonly talk about neglect, offers of early intervention not being accepted, and working with avoidant, non-compliant parents. Ultimately, we need to prevent the harm from neglect happening rather than acting afterwards. So as Ali said, there's a triennial analysis of serious case reviews by Brandon, and themes from these national reviews. They're also a feature of Suffolk cases where children have been harmed or died in Suffolk. Neglect is highlighted in the publication of Baby E and Mary. The impact of ongoing neglect was never really seen as a risk. But as these reviews remind us, neglect can be fatal and should be part of practitioners' mindset. We must keep the child focus with an emphasis on their lived experience and hearing their voice. In Baby E's case, it was notable there was almost a total lack of the use of any screening or risk assessment tool, which would have provided an evidence-based assessment with outcomes. In Mary's case, neglect of her health needs were not seen collectively as impacting on her. Different health providers working with her worked in isolation, not considering what others were doing, what others were seeing. They weren't looking at the whole picture. At the time of Mary's death, she was a teenager and her voice wasn't included. Nobody thought about her everyday life and her lived experience and what it would be like. She wasn't brought to some of her health appointments. Some of the engagement was sporadic. And there was at times a reluctant engagement by her mother, her carer. And it appeared there was very little challenge to the child not having adequate health care. As Ali has said, neglect takes many forms, and Jan Horwath writes about 6 areas. So for medical neglect, that can include consistent delay in accessing routine healthcare. For example, immunisations. We know it's not mandatory to have, and if families don't want to have them, they'll usually articulate this at an early stage and evidence their rationale and thinking. And of course, that's their right to choose. However, some children will have parents who consistently fail to attend timely appointments, often cancelling, rescheduling, not attending. They'll have a delay in accessing basic healthcare that includes not only their immunisations, but dental, optician and developmental reviews. Often in health, we're chasing, encouraging and facilitating attendance at health appointments, only to have it repeated again and again. So what does that mean for the health outcomes of a child who continues to have a delay in health appointments, a delay in treatments, or poor compliance with medication, for example, those that have asthma, epilepsy or diabetes? And that's the case for Mary. She was an asthmatic. Health services often discharge children who are repeatedly not brought for appointments. As Ali mentioned, we do have a policy, a was not brought policy, and non-attendance is seen as a risk. But at times, the lack of engagement needs to be looked at holistically and in context of what else is happening for the child and their vulnerabilities. Where are the additional protective factors for them? For example, does the child also miss a lot of nursery or school? Do they attend other reviews, other checkups? Who else is seeing the child? Health can often work in isolation when considering the risk, when in fact what health knows helps support the wider knowledge of what life might be like for that child. So we sometimes use the analogy, it's like the missing piece of a puzzle. Obesity has now been recognised as a potential safeguarding concern for some children and young people. And in Suffolk, we've had several cases of morbidly obese children presenting to health, where despite the offer of support and intervention, the children's weight has increased and the associated risk factors. For many of these children, it's not a case of eat less, move more. The pattern of behaviours is entrenched, and often behaviours are coping mechanisms for parental issues such as depression, substance misuse, domestic abuse, or poor attachment. And until those underlying issues are addressed, the weight loss and the healthy lifestyle messages are lost, and the cycle of interventions to the child continue. As in the serious case review that Ali mentioned, lack of supervision can lead to accidents and injury. It can include young children having to look after their younger siblings. Siblings can be hurt by each other, as we heard when Ali told us about the children in Staffordshire. Those children were seen with bite marks and injuries. and the review stated that the level of injury to those young children is physically and emotionally neglectful, as there appeared to be little parental supervision or care of the children. The injuries at times were seen as plausible. However, if the children had been seen by a paediatrician for a medical assessment, it would have allowed for expertise, examination and clarity to see if the mechanism of the injury fitted what was being seen. Poor supervision at bedtime leads to potential for lack of sleep, affecting concentration at school, lack of supervision and boundaries when using electronic devices, online gaming on adult platforms, accessing pornography and violent images online. Children are often left to their own devices, and it affects all ages. We often don't consider teenagers as being at risk of neglect. It can often be accepted that possibly they can look after themselves. So how do we respond to parents? We often hear professionals and parents indeed themselves say they love the children, but what does love look like? Children also need to be nurtured, and the dictionary meaning of nurture is if you nurture something, such as a young child or a young plant, you care for it while it is growing and developing. That includes stimulating, playing with children, reading, talking, singing, developing their language and communication skills. Some parents need help to gain these skills and understand how children develop and learn and see the importance of nurturing their child. Often we see periods of improvement followed by periods of deterioration. We're told things that are not evidenced by what is seen. This too was that feature of that serious case review in Staffordshire. There was very little evidence that life was improving for the children. Are we curious enough? Why does the house smell of smoke if the parents tell us they smoke outside? Why are older children still having dummies, bottles, wearing nappies? Poor weight gain or weight loss, not consistent with a healthy diet that the parents say they're being offered. Not attending appointments to be weighed. Is nursery school provision being accessed and attended consistently so the experience is meaningful for the child? How does it feel to have pain from dental decay that's not been treated? What's it like always being late for school, wearing inappropriate clothes? What does a young child feel when they're not stimulated by caregivers and they're often left to their own devices, often playing on electric devices? Health professionals need to use their skills and knowledge to assess and confirm what is happening. Be curious. They need to be mindful of the potential to become desensitised to what children are experiencing. And we need to avoid normalising families in poverty, as it is often similar to many other cases seen on their caseload. The National Child Safeguarding Practice Review panel described that when the refusal of help and support happens and the offer from agencies are then dropped, the children are being sent on a pathway to harm. We need to ask the why question more often. For example, why are they not attending? It could be fear. Parents don't understand the importance. They may not have the finances to travel. They may worry about who will look after older children while they attend, or they can't take the time off work. We need to explore why is engagement reluctant or sporadic. And we need to have those conversations with parents and carers to understand more. It's not just about accepting what is said. So within those conversations, we can use the assessment triangle or the assessment framework. And the triangle is a simple way of representing the three domains that assessments should take account of: the child's developmental needs, the parent or carer's capacity, and the wider family and environment. All areas should be explored and, as before, seek to clarify or have evidence whether parental reporting does not match what is seen. So where concerns are raised or emerging, as Ali said, the use of the graded care profile tool can be used. Some areas will only accept a safeguarding referral to the local authority for neglect, and they won't accept it until it's backed with the graded care profile outcome. So we could use it, as Ali has said, to see what works well and what parents may need help and support with. The outcome may indicate the need for a social care referral. Recent serious case reviews have also identified that health professionals should also bear in mind home visits are mostly planned and anticipated. Consider, has some attempt been made to tidy up or improve conditions? And if not, what does that say about parents' acceptance of conditions? Or if there has been a report of that we're tidying up or we're decorating or we're repairing the home, why is the home still in a poor state? So what should health professionals be doing to identify and support those at risk? As Ali has said, the abuse and neglect of children is a serious matter, and for professional responses to have the best chance of success, they need to fully involve the children and parents. In many serious case reviews, a learning point has been that families need to know and understand what is being asked and expected of them in ways and using language they understand. Professionals need to clearly explain what they're worried about and what is needed in order to reduce the risks and worries. When authors of previous reviews have met and spoken with families after an incident, the families often say they didn't know what people were worried about. They didn't know what was required of them. And they said they often said and did things they thought the professional wanted to see or hear. So we need to keep child focused. We need to find the evidence rather than listening to carers, using assessment tools to articulate judgments so that they can be based on evidence and research. We also need to be mindful of being over-optimistic about the capacity to change and maintain those protective behaviours. Maintain accurate records and document the actions taken. Capture the voice of the child, be their voice, the health expert to explain to others the impact of neglect on a child's physical and emotional well-being. And Ali touched on that as well when health are used to participate in strategy meetings. Seek support and supervision of the cases that we're working with. Refer and escalate. Have robust and respectful professional challenge if we're worried that things aren't moving in a way that we would expect. Compile a timeline. What do others know? What are their concerns? And look back at records. By not looking back at historical information and recurring patterns of behaviour, we lose the opportunity for full appreciation of the risks of neglect, that cumulative effect. We lose sight of what's happened in the past and we just focus on what we see now. And we also need to consider possibly the need for paediatric assessment. So the medical assessment is a holistic review of all the child's needs, physical and emotional, and it can identify unmet need. It can include body mapping, photography, and describe any physical injuries noted. And this is really valuable to the child so that they can receive the appropriate health care, but it also helps support the ongoing involvement of social care and police as the paediatrician can prepare a report with findings and analysis. And this supports any evidence gathered that might be needed by social care and the police. So I'm going to hand over to Holly now from the police, who'll discuss how the police work in neglect cases.
Thanks, Caroline. There you go. I'll wait for you to finish the screen. I'm conscious that obviously we've been talking 45 minutes. I just spoke to Tracy. We'll take sort of not long because I appreciate everyone's got busy diaries and we don't want to keep you longer than necessary. But if everyone has a 5-minute leg stretch and toilet break, grab a cup of tea, anything, then I will deliver my part and we'll open up to Q&A if there is any. So if everyone can be back and ready to go again in 5 minutes at 10:50, that would be ideal. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly.
Hi everyone. Right, okay, I think that's 10-2, so hopefully everyone has had a chance to come back. Like Ali and Caroline says, it's so hard doing these sort of presentations because you literally just talk to yourself. So apologise if people are on the phone or having to do something, but I need to get started. Tracy, can you just confirm that you can see the screen?
Yes, Holly, we can see it. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we can see the slides. Yeah.
Grand. In which case then I will crack on. So my name's Holly Evans. I'm the current Detective Chief Inspector, so Ops Manager in Suffolk Police, and I look after all the amazing detectives I'm fortunate enough to work with who deal with a lot of the child abuse and serious sexual offences matters and do a lot, if not the majority of our joint working with our partners from social care and health. And the purpose of sort of my input, and I'll focus on it from a slightly different perspective, is really a couple of things I want to try and get across from a policing perspective for both my colleagues and my partners in health and social care, is a little bit of myth dispelling about perhaps sometimes this threshold we think we need to achieve in relation to neglect from a criminal perspective. And actually there is a time and a place for that. And also really some of the stuff around professional curiosity, and hopefully just sort of give you a bit of confidence to know that it is okay to ask certain questions and how to capture that sum of information, because I do appreciate the relationships a lot of health professionals and social workers build with families are incredibly difficult at times, and they're built on trust, but it is okay to ask the question. So that's sort of the angle that I'm going to come at from. There is a tiny bit on legislation, but it's more just to make you aware. I promise I won't dwell on it or go into the minutiae of it, because it'd be incredibly boring for everybody on the call. But I just really want to get across the one message, and if I can leave it with you, there is one message. It's check, corroborate and capture. And I think they're three really, really important things to just bear in mind if you have a chance to look at the SCR after this. We've had ones in Suffolk, we've got cases in Suffolk, and I will sort of talk about one anonymously at the end, where these features that Ali and Caroline and the report have already touched on do appear. And I just think it's really important that we remember that we can corroborate facts, we can capture information, and we shouldn't be afraid to do it. As I say, I think ultimately a lot of the cases we deal with, like Ali says, these children aren't going to come to fatal harm, and quite often the criminal justice route might not be appropriate, but we should recognise that sometimes it is. And with the best efforts in the world, you can do everything you want for a family, but actually criminal prosecution might be the best way forward, and we want to support you in doing so. But there are also things that we need in order to make that an achievable goal. I'll talk about legislation in a minute. As I say, for the purpose of the relevant legislation, when you're referring to neglect and we're talking about children, it's anyone under the age of 18 is defined as a child or young person, and the status and entitlement of services or protection is not changed even if a child or young person is 16 and living independently. And I know that's a really tricky area for so many of us when we have some of these older children who do live independently, but it's really key to remember that. And again, we think of child abuse quite often, and we think of physical abuse, sexual abuse, but neglect is an equal party in that when we talk about child abuse. And actually we should be considering that and bearing that with the same sort of view and importance as when we do think of sexual offences, for example, or physical offences such as assaults. Actually, neglect should be an equal factor for consideration when we're talking about options for criminal offences. So as I say, I won't dwell on this next slide for too long, but it's just really to bring it to your attention, although I'm sure as professionals, so many of you already know this, so I do apologise. But when we think of neglect, actually we're talking about Section 1 of the Children and the Young Persons Act. You'll see it's quite an old bit of legislation, one of the older bits that we still use. And it actually refers to, there's two types really, and I'll come on to them a little bit and explain the difference in relation to neglect around ill treatment and willful neglect. And actually, when we think about, and I'm not going to read this word for word, you can have a copy of the presentation afterwards if you want, but it talks about effectively ill treatment. It requires a deliberate act or conduct on part of the offender, and in this case, obviously, predominantly we'll be thinking parents, but it's carers and other persons as well, which could probably just be described as ill treatment, irrespective, and this is a really key part to remember, and I think something for all of us to be cognizant of, is whether damage or the threatened damage to the health of the victim actually occurs. So you don't have to have necessarily a fatal outcome or a significant outcome. And it also requires us to prove a guilty mind involving either an appreciation by the offender at the time that he was inexcusably ill-treating a patient or was reckless And that's another really, really key point to remember when you're thinking about burdens or the role that parents play. Actually, they can be reckless as to their actions, and that's equally as important. And I think the other thing to remember is that when we're talking about the burden for sort of the criminal justice route in relation to neglect, deliberate's a really key word that features whether we're looking at ill treatment or willful neglect. And as an example, I think something to bear in mind that's quite healthy is that when someone who knows that their person in their care needs medical assistance and deliberately, that is by conscious decision, refrains from calling a doctor, for example, would be guilty of willful neglect. Equally, a person who fails to provide medical care because he or she does not care whether it's needed or is not reckless is also guilty. And I think that's really prevalent when you think of the basics that a lot of our parents know children need: food, water, shelter, clothing, basic medical need, dentists, all of the things that to many of us seem really obvious. It's obvious to a lot of our parents as well. And actually, if they have deliberately chosen not to seek some of those provisions for some of the children that we're dealing with, actually, we might be able to meet some of the standards there. And when you're talking about, and I know I mentioned it earlier and I'll keep referring about check, corroborate and capture what you were told, when you think about corroborating and checking things, if they say they didn't realise, do they seek medical treatment for themselves? That's a really, really key point to note, because often they're the first, or many of the first, to pick up the phone and try some of the NHS services that are available and to seek medical treatment for themselves. But if they understand they need it for themselves, then by default, they would understand that they need to seek it for their children as well. And this is the sort of information capturing that then perhaps if we look to pursue a criminal justice route, it's something that becomes sort of more important to us. But as I say, I'm not going to dwell hugely on the legislation side of things, because you can get into the weeds of it and it can become quite tricky. The point of doing it is that actually I think the key things for every professional to remember, that we need to remember when you're thinking about whether or not a criminal justice route might become an option, is around it being deliberate or reckless. But they are things that we can prove, so it's not an unachievable thing to do. And I think another example, as I say, it talks about failing to take steps to provide as well. So in terms of where a parent or person legally liable to maintain a child fails to provide adequate food, clothing, medical aid or lodging for the child, or having been unable to provide the above, failed to take steps to procure it. So have they been given an option to know where to go, to know what to do? As I say, I'm not going to dwell on that. I want to talk a lot about some of the things that I think hopefully can help a little bit and give you a bit of confidence to know to ask questions and pry a bit. And professional curiosity is, I think, perhaps something that either comes more comfortably to an individual or not, but it's something that we're all capable of doing. And I know we all do on a daily basis. It's just sometimes we need to do and dig a little bit more. And I genuinely believe it when I say that I think we all have a really privileged role, and it's certainly not a burden. And we actually are probably some of the most protective factors for some of the most vulnerable children. And sadly, all too often, our role means actually that we're one of the very few people with the best opportunity to actually see these concerns. And I'm not going to dwell, but we all know that the impact of COVID means actually a huge amount of those protective factors have been stripped away. And so now more than ever, we need to be alert to those failure to attends, to the children that say they've been to the dentist but have awful dental hygiene. And it's us that have the privilege of being able to do it. And again, nothing I say is meant with the intention of scaring, but I just think it's a really pertinent quote that District Judge Nicholas Crichton in 2010 said, that 2 months of delay in making decisions in the best interests of a child equates to 1% of a childhood that cannot be restored. And I know how quickly 2 months can go past, and it can go past in an instant because we get caught up in 1,000 other things in our workload, and every one of us is under a pressure that I don't negate. But when you put that into context, that's that percentage of a child's life that we can't get back. It really, really stuck with me, that. And so I just think it's so important that we act on what we know. And the reason I want to talk about professional curiosity is that seeking corroboration can often undercover so much more. And just to go into depth in some examples a little bit, a lot of the things that came out of that serious case review from staff, but is prevalent in a lot of things that we see locally, is that example around smoking. You go into a home and the parents say that they don't smoke in front of the children, but the ashtray is inside. Ask them why. If they say that they smoke by the back door, but there's no evidence that the ashtray sits by the back door, ask them why. Does the house smell heavily of smoke? Ask them why. Do the children smell of smoke? Ask them why the children smell of smoke. It's other things as well, as I'm sure every single one of us has been on the receiving end of a parent that tells us that they feed their children healthy food, which perhaps by our standards we wouldn't agree. But if you see signs of junk food all over the kitchen, talk to them about it. Don't be afraid to ask them to see inside of their fridge. Do they actually understand what healthy eating is? And often perhaps not that's the case, but you can comment and guide them, but keep a record of all of this. It's just asking a few more questions sometimes uncovers when they're not telling us the truth, and that's so important. I think other examples as well that we've seen in quite a few, and I mentioned the dentist one because it's featured in a case that we've recently worked really, really hard with our colleagues from health and social care in, and had some good longer term outcomes for children. But if you're speaking to children that are being routinely removed for medical, be it doctors or dentist appointments, but have terrible teeth, ask them about the appointment. If a child says to you they've been to or the parent says to you they've been to the dentist, and you ask the child and they have no idea what you're talking about and they don't know what the experience of going to a dentist is, record that, capture that. We can ask the questions, and it's not a problem at all. A common one that was not so common, but one that I've seen recently, and I know a lot of health professionals experience this a lot, and it must be a real challenge for you. Do not attend. They happen a lot. Parents says that the car broke down, for example, and that they couldn't make it, or that something else came up. Ask questions. Where did the car break down? Who's your recovery service provider? Do you have recovery for the future? If they say my car went to a garage, don't be afraid to ask them which garage to go to in a conversational tone. The reason I say this is if you can record this information, be it on your care notes, the graded care plan, all of those things, if in the future we decide to go down a criminal justice route, this is all information that as the police, we can check, corroborate and confirm, and if necessary, prove dishonesty. I'm not asking for 1 second that our colleagues in health and social care who are under a lot of pressure seek to go away and make inquiries with car garages. I accept that, but you can push and you can then record that information, because it could help us a lot more further down the line. And I think one of the conversations I've had with Ali previously is around, I don't doubt for 1 second the amount of advice that is given by social care and health to parents around healthy eating, around seeking medical assistance, what times they should put children to bed, routines to try and help parents that perhaps don't have the same luxury of an upbringing that some of us have had. Record that, whether you put it on the graded care plan, whether you put it on your health notes, record the information that you've given them, because if we record it, we can rely on it at a later date to say to these parents that actually you were told what you needed to do. And it sounds a bit like we do this in policing with the intent of scaring people, and we really, really don't. But one thing that we are all taught right from the outset is that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And that sounds terrible, but actually it's a brilliant mantra to live by. And I write everything down, because despite our professional status, and every single one of us will be held in high regard in a court environment, but actually if you wrote it down at the time, then it's so much easier. It's easier for your recall. It's easier for you to understand your decision making. But more importantly, if you gave a written document to those parents that said, on this date, we've had a conversation and I've told you that you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to give your children a firm routine. This is how they eat healthy. That's when their behaviour becomes deliberate or recklessness, if they choose to continue that. This is all the sorts of information that we can use if we then apply for records to help prove that burden of neglect. And I think that's really, really important. So I just encourage that kind of behaviour as much as possible. It's completely within your power, and I think that's really, really important. And just moving on a little bit more, as I say, we've kind of touched on some of this already. So in terms of where you record that information, and it's the same within policing, I always encourage my officers, whether they do statements, we keep day books. As I say, it might be your internal systems in health notes, visitor notes. I know a lot of children often have read books. In social care, you have access to Liquid Logic, the graded care profile. I don't profess to know all your systems, and I'm sorry if I've missed off key ones, but there will be somewhere that you can record that and write it down and give your opinion, and don't be afraid of that as well. And as I say, the real key thing here for me as well is that continual check the information you're getting, try and corroborate it, and can you confirm it? Don't be afraid to ask them questions. And if they say they've got appointments, most of us now know that the NHS are more than capable of sending text message reminders for appointments. It's not a problem to ask for a copy of that at all. I don't think in any way, shape or form, because actually, who are we here to protect? We're here to protect the child, aren't we? We're here to support the parents, but protect the child. And one of the key, as I say, the features that comes out of the serious case reviews, but is a heavy message that in policing we get taught in our SUDIC training, is don't lose sight of the voice of the child. We desperately want to help parents, and we desperately want to create safe family homes and environments for these children, but do not lose sight of them and their conduct and their behaviours, because they will tell you so much of what you need to know. And sadly, all of us have been on the receiving end of parents that will tell us what they think we want to hear. And in terms of, I touch on information a little bit more down the bottom here, because we're all busy people, every single one of us is, and I'm guilty of this as much as I'm sure some of my colleagues are. But take a minute to check what you know before you do things. We deal often with things in isolation because we have specific time slots in order to achieve something. But I just beg of you, take 2 minutes to make sure we know what we had before we go into something, and don't treat referrals or visits in isolation. It's that, as I'm saying, and Caroline and Ali will say, it's that cumulative effect of the behaviour on children, and it doesn't have to be, in terms of the legislation, physical. And periods of isolation, bullying from parents, those kind of things can meet the threshold for neglect if we want to look down a criminal justice route. And don't take what you've got at face value in that one moment and treat that referral just because every other referral might have been graded as a low or a medium. It doesn't mean this is, and it doesn't mean that they should be ignored. We have to look at the bigger picture. And I think that's so important when we're looking at neglect, especially because individually each one of these referrals or these points where we're visiting a parent might be seemingly quite minor, but if you build up that accumulation of behaviour, what's the effect on that child? And what, again, I'll come back to that quote, what if it's 2 months before we get that next bit of information and we treat that in isolation, and then it's 4 months and 6 months? Well, then you're up to 3% of a child that we can't recover, and that's so important. And as I say, I've already quite spoken a bit about the benefits of the criminal justice route. This isn't going to be an option every time. So many of the professionals will help and support families to a point where they aren't involved in the system that's available to them, and they grow on to be healthy, loving families, and you do an incredible job. There are also going to be those times, however, where we do need to pursue the criminal justice route. And the reason I want to mention that is because there is this myth, I think, that sat around, especially in policing for a very long time, that just because they're standards that we wouldn't apply to, they won't meet that at the Crown Prosecution Service. But it's our job to test that and push that. And actually, when you look at the legislation and the words they use, there's nothing in there that talks about the extent or the threshold that we have to meet. And actually, some of the levels that we have to meet aren't nearly as high as we perceive them to be or we believe them to be. And if the criminal justice route is the best option because as partners you've tried everything you can to direct and guide and support these parents, or actually we notice early on that the risk to these children is so great, then I do want us to consider neglect as an option just as much as we would sexual violence or physical violence. And that message is probably equally, if not more, for my police colleagues that are on the call, because we shouldn't ignore it at all. So what I will do is briefly I want to talk about a case study just to put some of this into context. It is anonymised and it's not one that is really in the public domain yet because it's still going through our internal processes and is with the Crown. But it's quite an important one to touch on, because when Ali talks about and Caroline talks about, actually these do happen in Suffolk. Yes, they don't necessarily go to a serious case review, but there are very much instances in Suffolk where I think these behaviours are really prevalent. And this particular case relates to a young baby, and if some of you suddenly become aware of it, obviously I appreciate you might do, please just bear that in mind. She presented at one of our county's hospitals, significantly malnourished, really underweight, in really poor health. And I apologise to my medical colleagues on the line if I get this wrong, but I believe it's a frenulum here. This part here was torn, which can be, and I use that term loosely as I understand it, an indicator of some concerns of abuse. And in this case, it actually featured several areas mentioned by my colleagues so far in terms of medical, nutritional, emotional and physical abuse. There was a huge amount of DNAs in this child's record already in the very short period she'd been alive. We're talking months old, not years. A lot of excuses from parents that we hadn't really followed up. A lot of phone calls where every one of us could have maybe just asked that question just once more. And as this case progresses, and I think it's just something I kind of want to bring to the forefront of the mind of people, is there are challenges when we look to progress a case of neglect in the criminal justice system, but I want to prove to you that they can be overcome. And this is probably about dispelling myths, as I say, for some of my police colleagues. One of the often what we'll have to do in this scenario is go and get expert medical evidence from different practitioners in relation to the number of different areas of the body that have been traumatized or harmed as a result of the neglectful treatment. Some of the comments that we've had include doctors saying it's one of the longest they've ever done, and that they've covered everything from antenatal periods to the end of the period when the child came into the care of social services and beyond, and referred to it as a heartbreaking case. We've had to consult ophthalmic surgeons, pediatric neurosurgeons, consultant neuroradiologists to review the material. And actually, this particular case, we've never had so many experts. And currently, as I say, it's sat with our colleagues in the Crown, but we have, and I don't mind saying this, and I say it with the intent of learning, just to prove to you that we can do it. But what it takes, we've spent in the region of somewhere of about £20,000 getting expert medical opinion. It doesn't currently include future costs, and we will spend that money if we need to. It's absolutely the right thing to do. I say this with a view to proving to my colleagues and demonstrating to my colleagues that we can and we will do it. It's not unachievable, even if we have to spend the money to do it. This is an extreme case, absolutely. And this child presented, as I say, so underweight and so malnourished. There were concerns about her neurological development, about her development of her sight, and all of her key sort of functions. And so we will absolutely do it. And kind of the last message I really want to leave you with, and as I say, I've sort of tried to touch on the report of the staff's SCR and that of what Caroline and Ali have said from a police perspective, is it's not an unachievable goal, the criminal justice route for neglect. And if you feel strongly as professionals, whether you're health, social care or police, that we need to pursue it, please push that. But we have to check what we're told, corroborate it and confirm it, and just record it. Record what they say to you, and just open the fridge, check where they're smoking, look for where there's evidence of poor nutrition. And if they, like Ali said earlier, if the kid doesn't talk and won't engage with you, just make a note of that, because if the parents have said they will engage with professionals, you've noticed a difference there, and we can do something with that information because your opinion means so much to us. And I hope that's kind of given you a bit of an idea from our perspective, and encourage you to have a think about what we can and can't do. And I'm really grateful for your time. I appreciate not everybody will have questions, and we do want to afford people the opportunity to, if they would like. So I'll let Tracy sort of coordinate, but if anyone's got any questions, feel free to put your hand up. By the way, if you haven't, don't feel obliged. It's the first sort of thing really that collectively we've done, so we would appreciate any feedback, and you might not want to put it in the chat, but feel free to contact Tracy. You've all got her email with some thoughts. But if anyone has got any questions, please feel free to put your hand up, put something in the chat if you prefer not to speak out. Or as I say, if you want to send it to Tracy afterwards with any feedback, then myself, Ali or Caroline can always come back to you separately. That's not a problem. Bear with, I can see someone's put their hand up. I've just got to get the participants up so I can see who it is. Craig?
Yeah, hi, I'm one of the IROs based in Lowestoft. A key message you made about the 2 months and the gaps of how we don't act, and it relates to, sorry, I'm getting feedback, which is really
apologies, hold on, let me turn it might be Craig, go on.
And it relates to recommendation 3 from the serious case review around multi-agency chronologies. I don't know if we necessarily have in neglect cases multi-agency chronologies, but I'm always surprised and amazed about the did not attend and the non-attendance at medical appointments that we don't hear, and they just close. So it'd be a really serious medical thing. They haven't attended 2 or 3, they're closed, and you have to re-refer. And it's often at conference we'll hear from health colleagues that actually those, and I'm amazed that we know that hospitals and all health agencies have these lists of children who are subject to CP. Why it's not checked when there's non-attendance and there's a referral made when children aren't attending significant health appointments. And it can often be 6 months before it's brought together, because there's not the joint chronology that's happening, and it's at conference that it will come out. And it's just something that I've always found very interesting, why we haven't progressed that forward.
I think Caroline, I can see she's appeared. It might be more print. Obviously, it's not. I'll let her respond.
Thank you, Holly. I mean, that is a valid point, and a lot of the work that we've been doing more recently, sorry, I can't remember who asked the question, has been around the was not bought and the importance of what that means for a child. So as you say, okay, they haven't come 3 times, you're then not going to offer them any appointments. What does that mean for the child? What does it look like? And also, as I said in my presentation, to look at who else is working with that child and what else could be protective. So it could be, okay, they haven't been to 1 appointment, but they are seeing another professional, and that person can do some work with them. So it is very much in that, as Holly has said and Ali has said, really, we need to be curious all the time, and we always need to check reference. Who else is doing some work with that child? Who else knows about that child and the family? And if it is a health issue, we need to take responsibility for that. We can't expect social care to be picking up and giving parents advice about asthma treatment, for example, in the Mary case. Very much that was a health responsibility, but we did work in silos, and there was a GP involved, there was specialist asthma, specialists involved at the hospital, etc., etc. And we sort of worked in isolation, and we thought, oh, well, it's okay, we haven't seen her, but I guess the GP has. But the GP also had very long protracted appointments offered to Mary, and it was that sporadic. She came once, then she didn't come again. So I think it is about getting that message out, that we need to be really clear what is the impact, and we do need to make referrals. And when we make referrals, we need to be really clear in our referral what it is we're worried about, because quite often they go into the MASH, and the MASH, it's not made clear what it means for that child. And so again, it's using our expertise to evidence and record what the impact would be that voice for that child. And I hope it's something that from these sort of webinars and work, especially we've been doing in primary care and with our acute providers, that we are key to this. So I hope you'll see an improvement, because it isn't good enough. But as you said, 6 months later, we're kind of wondering why the child has never been seen and why we accepted that.
Thank you.
Karen, I can just notice, Karen Goffin, I think you put in the comments around in health, it often feels that physical harm needs to happen before anything is done, despite lots of low level but ongoing concerns from lots of professionals and lots of meetings. And what else can we do? I'm not going to pretend I've got the magic answer to that, but I will give you my professional opinion. And it kind of touches on a little bit of, I think, what I've already said about dispelling those myths. Even internally in policing, we often have an assumption that in order to pursue a case of neglect, your threshold has to be incredibly high. And I think it's everybody in those meetings being accountable and being really honest and laying the facts on the table. And someone, you know, your chair, whoever, has to acknowledge that when we talk about that cumulative behaviour, if you as a professional can sit in that meeting and say, actually, I hear what you're saying, but look in front of you right now, you have a history of cumulative low-level offences, which we know based on serious case reviews can amount to serious harm and neglect for a child. We need to do more and we're not doing more. That environment should be accountable to making sure that whether it's the police that come away and actually accept we need to take away and look at the criminal justice route, but I think as professionals, it's about that, I think Caroline used a really good expression, professional challenge in those environments. We are all responsible for speaking up. And if you don't feel that enough is being done in an environment, yet you can see that cumulative behaviour of low-level offences, be it bullying, isolation, the siblings hurting the other sibling, they're gaining weight, they're not going to doctor's appointments, they say they're talking but they're not talking, the house smells of smoke, there's no food in the fridge, you can see all that, bring it to the forefront and make your colleagues see it as you do. I mean, Ali and Caroline might have something to offer, but that would be my advice. Absolutely. Be the one that speaks up and lays it out for everyone to see.
Can I come in, Holly?
Yeah, of course, Ali, go on.
Lovely, Piers. So I was going to say as well, don't forget the escalation policy, the Suffolk Safeguarding Partnership escalation policy. We've got to do all those things that both Caroline and Holly have just said. But if you're feeling that the concerns are not being recognised, there is that escalation policy there that is there to be used, and use it. Hopefully, if we're doing all those other things, it's going to be very clear. And if there's a chronology as well, it will bring it to the forefront, and your colleagues will be able to see it. But use that escalation policy if you feel that you're not being heard.
And also that timeline, Ali, because I think, as we've all been saying, that the long-term effects of the bits that we're seeing in isolation. So we see just the incident that we'd be looking at, but actually when you bring to the fore all the other incidents that happen through that child's life, through their early stages of maybe not having their health needs met, not having their developmental needs met, and here you are talking about other areas of neglect, you need to be that voice for that child to say what it means for that whole journey through however old they are, to have that build up of what's been happening and not having their needs met and what it means for them. And you need to be that voice. And I would hope that all professionals across all the multi-agencies, I know that they're listened to, their opinions are valued and respected, and that we do have really good conversations. But sometimes it is about being brave, and it is about not accepting or challenging in that in those safe environments where we can have those difficult conversations. And sometimes it is when maybe not seeing eye to eye, but actually when you do have timelines and evidence, it's really, really key to bringing us all to seeing it from the same perspective.
Joanna, I was just reading your comment, and I don't know if I put you on the spotlight, I do apologise, but I didn't know if you wanted to expand on it. You've mentioned that often difficulty is translating what is seen by other agencies as a health issue, rather than the wider concerns of neglect are seen by the health professionals. Do you mean potentially, hello, you're right, other agencies dismissing it? Because, say, hypothetically, I'm just saying, the police see this as a health problem, so actually it's not one for us, kind of thing. Is that what you're referring to?
I think on the frontline professionals, I'm a named nurse, so I'm kind of like that in-betweeny place where cases are raised to me when when practitioners maybe are struggling to take their concerns where they think they should go. I just say, it's just a reflection that often we're finding, especially with kind of those missed appointments or parents not following advice, when we feel that there is a real implication for the well-being of that child, that often that is being discussed in the best ways we can, but translation of that being understood outside of health is quite difficult. I know Caroline's aware of lots of different discussions we're having about that, and it is often with those cases where there are existing medical needs and they are complicated, so there is a place for us to talk about those. But yeah, I think we've had recently as well quite a lot of bounce back where it's kind of like, well, that's a health issue. So I think we then feel slightly frustrated when we hear people saying we're not escalating, missed appointments, when I think on the front line quite a lot of health professionals would feel they are escalating health concerns, but getting the bounce back that it's for health to deal with, rather than a wider understanding of that being a concern from health, that we're saying that this is medical neglect. And maybe that's something we need to be clear about, using that terminology. But I think that's an ongoing difficulty for us.
Yeah, I think I'll just say one thing, and then obviously Caroline, Ali, if they've got anything to add. And hopefully what the purpose of some of what I try to do is maybe just help you understand a little bit more about the legislation and my colleagues, because actually there is no harm in your referral saying, and sometimes it's about giving yourself enough of a backing and enough evidence in your referrals that really people can't refute it as just being a health issue. By that, what I mean is, don't be afraid to put in your referral. And it's like what I just said a minute ago. Actually, we've now had X amount of sorry if you refer to them as something else, do not attends, and we've had this, based on this report that I've read, actually, and your neglect legislation, I am confident that this meets the threshold for exploration around neglect from a different perspective, because the cumulative effect of all of these does show that the parents are deliberately or willfully, which are one and the same, not providing the children with the basic things that they need. And be just, and I'm not saying you're not, but my advice would be so clear on your referrals and your escalations that actually what you think the cumulative effect of that behaviour is and where you think the other agencies fit in. Because again, sometimes perhaps the person that is then reviewing that doesn't necessarily know it, and I don't mean that unkindly. It's just we can't all know everything, can we? But Caroline, Ali, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add in relation to that. If you haven't, don't feel free.
It's Ali. No, I think you've covered it, and Jo, we've had conversations as well with Caroline about the same kind of concern. So nothing further to add. But I think we need to keep unpicking it, and that advice, Holly, has been really helpful. And that term, medical neglect, I think that would be really useful. It sounds kind of really obvious actually, but you know, it does sort of smack of this is concerning, this is a real worry, and we need to be sitting up and taking notice. So I think that would be really helpful, Jo. Thank you.
And just also what I would say is, you know, a reflection thinking about, I did read the serious case review and highlighted the aspect around the community paediatricians being, or the paediatrician who's going to do a medical being a part of that strategy discussion. I'm just curious to know what the plans are for moving that forward, because, you know, on the ground, you know, our practitioners are really keen to be a part of that, and actually we're just starting an audit to look at kind of percentage wise what of our paediatricians have been invited, and it's tiny at the moment. So I don't know how we move that forward and if you've got plans around that.
So I'll come in there, Jo. So I've had over the last couple of years actually conversations with Dr. Matter Ankit, in the West, and Rachel Furley as well has been involved in conversations, and it's a bit of a balance really, because I think we're not geared up for it here in Suffolk, but because there's no demand, and because, you know, there isn't anyone to do it, we don't do it, and it's the culture has grown that we don't do it enough. And if we do it, I think it's, for me, still too much of we need to book an appointment, as opposed to actually, what's your opinion? What do you think we need? What do you think we should be doing? And as I said in my part of the presentation, also if we, you know, go out, because obviously a joint visit would be health and no, it wouldn't. It would be police and social care. And if we go out and think, oh, not so sure, or you know, we need to bring health back in on that conversation.
And we also now have legislation which is, you know, we have standards which we have to meet, which one of those states that we should be a part of a strategy discussion. So I think for us as well, we're now going to be measured on whether we're meeting that standard or not. So I think, yeah, there is something there too.
Cool.
One final point on that, and I hope something like this webinar will help us across the partnership and the multi-agency platform have that understanding of what all our roles are. And maybe historically the voice of health and the value of health hasn't necessarily been seen as important. And I know great work is being done to make sure that that health does become that equal third party. But I know there have been challenges, Ali, and I hope they won't be repeated. But, you know, decisions from strategy discussions have included that the children should be seen by a paediatrician for her holistic assessment. It's then gone out into a social work team where actually a decision has been made. Don't think that's needed. So we really do need to change what professionals believe or know happens at those medical assessments, so that they can see it as a value. So it isn't just about being able to say, well, there's a bruise there or a mark there, or the child's underweight. It is that whole holistic view of a child, and it can sometimes show us some unmet need, show us what injuries have happened and how they may have happened, and it can really add value to that whole tripartite coming together to understand what we need to do to keep these children safe.
Thanks, Caroline. So we've got a couple of hands up. I'm just going to come to Nora. I think you put something in the question. You said, I'll skip the praise. Thanks very much, though. You said, there you go. So specific points, the emotional impact on the work on workers, which acts as a barrier to achieving professional curiosity. And he said, how is this being acknowledged and addressed in the different professional groups? Did you want to expand on that, and then we can try and give you some sort of response, or at least take it away and come back to you? That's not a problem.
Well, it's just that some of the research around professional curiosity at the moment is pointing in that direction. And Ferguson research, for example, followed workers around otherwise very competent workers, but actually where they were very stressed emotionally and maybe weren't getting the support they needed, they tended to not see things. For example, a child was literally invisible on a home visit. And so I've been thinking about that in relation to, I know in social work we have supervision, regular, it's part of the standards, and I wonder about that in health and in the police, I suppose, and in social work, of course. But so I'm just wondering about that, given it's so crucial to achieving professional curiosity. Does health and police colleagues have that type of supervision or peer emotional type support that encourages those sorts of wide questions that you set out, Holly?
Well, I mean, from a police perspective, I appreciate it's quite different because we are developed as individuals to push and ask questions more, aren't we? It's the very nature of our role, and so I think we, right from when people join in the police service, they're encouraged in interviews to ask questions, probe, check, challenge, clarify. And I can obviously only speak from my perspective. We have a wealth of wellbeing services internally that I wouldn't necessarily say, if I'm being honest, they specifically focus on that element of curiosity needing additional support, because I can't say, and it might be my sort of negligence. I do apologise in relation to, I'm not familiar with the academic literature you're referring to, but I will very much take a look at it because it sounds particularly pertinent. But I can't say I notice it or know it to be a prevalent issue within policing, but it doesn't mean I won't take it away. It sounds like I'm avoiding the question, but I can't give you an honest answer from a policing perspective, and I'd rather be honest about that and not do the political response. Yeah, I'd absolutely like to go away and take a look at that literature, though, if you could send us the link at all. But I can't really add anything more. I don't know if either of my colleagues want to.
So within health, our staff have the opportunity, and they need to have supervision. So that would be with a named safeguarding professional. But of course, it's up to them to bring what they're worried about to that session, and up to the supervisee to maybe help have those conversations that draws out how professionals are feeling. And that should be very much part of supervision, about how we are feeling. But I know there's been some training. I haven't actually done it, but I would hope that the health has participated in, I think there was one, apologies, not sure of the title, but having difficult conversations and being professionally curious, because they are, I know Holly talks really eloquently about that challenge, ask, look, but sometimes, you know, we feel privileged to be able to go into families' homes, and then to step across into their home, it's their space, and to be asking to look in your fridge, look in your cupboards, you know, be challenging. It is quite hard. And I appreciate that it is a skill that we need to learn, and learn how we have those conversations to do it that doesn't feel threatening to the families. Because I think once we step into that world of being very curious, we have that potential for the family to say, well, you know, I don't want to see you again. And then, of course, we step into those realms of, we go round those repeated sort of cycles of not engaging, not being there for appointments, cancelling, etc., etc. So it's very much a skill that takes time to really build upon. And I think possibly for the police a little bit easier to do because of the nature of your role. I don't know what Ali thinks about that.
So there's lots that goes on in workforce development, and obviously people have you know, regular supervision. It's probably kind of more our core business as such. So definitely there are tools there, but I can see that Nora's put some stuff in the conversation pane, which we'll certainly take away. So that's, yeah, really grateful for that. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you. Karina, I can see you put a comment and you've had your hand up for a while very patiently, so you can either respond to which you want first. You've mentioned that actually in response to Nora's comments there is some training focused on professional curiosity and asking difficult questions, which is great. But did you have something else that you wanted to raise?
Yeah. Joe Stroud has also mentioned it's the Courageous Conversations training, and I've done it recently, and it was really, really helpful. The question I was going to ask, something which I know, I'm a children's occupational therapist, and during since COVID, I've had an increasing number of children who are on safeguarding register or their safeguarding concerns. Some of them are really, really easy because I can see that these are quite well-educated parents, and I feel that they are willfully neglecting or not meeting their child's needs. I think sometimes it's so much more difficult when there are parents who have learning difficulties themselves, and perhaps they're from a different country and a different culture. And I was really taken by your deliberately and willfully, because certainly I'm working with a family at the moment that the child quite rightly is in foster care and probably won't return to parents because they showed time after time really that they could not take on board and could not meet his needs. But it would have been hard to say it was willful and deliberate, because I just felt however much support we'd given them, they'd have had to have somebody living with them really to enable them to do that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I do appreciate entirely that obviously some of the things I say don't translate into every circumstance at all. And often cultural matters can be barriers, can't they? Because people come with different cultural ideologies about levels of care and response. So it isn't always going to be that easy. As I say, when we talk about the threshold, there is that element of recklessness in there as well. And I think probably one of the things that we would look at is if we wanted to consider a criminal justice route is that we would have to probably consider capacity. Like you say, there's always going to be that element of if someone's capacity is not present, then any sort of criminal prosecution is going to be quite difficult. But actually, if they have an element of capacity, and on the other hand, we can demonstrate that we've told them over and over and over and over again, and they have the capacity to understand that, that's where we can probably and potentially maybe start to look at, okay, well, are their actions deliberate now? As I say, that's the high end of the sort of threshold, but it doesn't mean it's not an achievable goal. It just means sometimes we have to be brave enough to push the barrier a little bit more and try something a little bit different. But I do accept entirely what you're saying, Karina. It's not black and white, and the families that a lot of you work with and we work with, but I know those in social care and health, obviously perhaps at the front a little bit more sometimes, they're not straightforward. And as you say, a lot of the parents aren't and haven't had the best upbringing themselves, but it comes down to an element of capacity versus their inability to continually not do what they're being told to. But that's something that we could explore from a criminal perspective with the support of our colleagues from social care and health.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because I kind of lead the preschool team. I do quite often have staff who just feel desperately sorry for the family, and I know they do. However, what I always say is you've got to keep the child at the centre of your thinking. Can they meet the child's needs? They've shown you that they can't. So you've got to stop feeling sorry for them. We've got to do something about it.
The biggest thing, and I hope Ali and Caroline would agree with me, so many of these SCRs that I read, and especially when we look at sudden unexplained death of children, that's the extreme end. I don't use that as a fear element. We lose sight of the child, of the voice, because understandably we want to support parents, so we want to help them. We don't want to think the worst of people, but the child is the centre of everything that we do, isn't it? But hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a response. I'm sorry that you had your hand up for so long.
That's okay, thank you.
You're on mute, Holly.
Holly, yeah.
God, we made it the whole presentation and then I did it. I'm so sorry. Helen, did you want to go? Helen Nelson, you did have your hand up, you've just taken it down.
No, sorry. I think one of the biggest, I work with Karina, by the way, so it's going to be a two-man band. I think one of the things that we sometimes really struggle with is we're asked in meetings to keep things quite positive, which is, you know, I completely understand, but sometimes I think that's when we feel some of the frustration that our concerns aren't being sometimes addressed, because there is this big thing, well, you're going to work with the parents, keep it positive, what have they done well? And I completely agree with that, but then sometimes that seems to overshadow actually the negatives and the worries that we have. I don't know how we did address that.
Does that not come up as part of the conversations in using maybe signs of safety? So what's working well, but then what are we also worried about?
So we do talk about what what we're worried about, but then they do try at the end to give a positive spin at the end. So sometimes we've had parents that come, like, you know, and it is some of our parents that have got more learning difficulties. I'll be quite thinking, well, that was really positive, wasn't it? We're doing all this well. So they've heard the positives they want to hear, but then don't hear the negatives. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think, as I said a little bit in my presentation, we really need to be clear with parents what it is we're worried about. So as well as talking about what has worked well, we need to be clear, because I think, as in the staff's case, I don't think the mum particularly saw it, and it wasn't explained to her what it was, and so the parents don't really know what it is they're being asked to do to make a difference. And then of course it culminates maybe in an incident, and they thought that they've been doing so well because everybody's told them that. So it is that using signs of safety to also articulate that there will still be things we're worried about. And you would hope, Ali, it would be part of the chair's role to also include that, so that again we don't lead parents down this path of them not understanding what we're worried about if they're being told that things are going so well.
Absolutely, it is. And I've got a couple of chairs in this conversation. I can see Craig's just thrown his hand up there, so he's probably better placed to answer. But we've obviously lost the boards where we would, you know, the visual, which we had before we went into COVID. But Craig, come in, because you're doing this on a day-to-day basis.
There's a lot of work that happens, particularly with the social workers before conferences, but we're always very clear about the danger statement needs to highlight what we are worried about. We've moved from the "we know you love your child," that's no longer used. That was very prevalent not so long ago, where people would want to have the positives in, because people do feel very worried about just naming what we're worried about. So at an initial conference, you do start with why we're at conference and what we're worried about. And then you move on to working well, because the science of safety is very clear. It's holistic. We look at, for all circumstances, no matter how dire, there is positives that occur, and science of safety is very much based in that. And then review conferences, you do start with what has worked well since the last conference, what have we achieved, because you're looking to build and improve. And we do also ensure, and the plan at the end is where we are saying to people, this is where we need to move forward. So we need to acknowledge what's happening and what's working well, but we don't take away from the fact that there are outstanding worries and your child's remaining subject to a plan if it hasn't ended. So I mean, there may be people who have been to my conferences. I'm very clear with people about what we're worried about, and you can do that just as effectively by being clear with them what you're worried about as you can by saying, oh, I think sometimes parents get confused when people are too worried to address. They don't know what they need to do. Hence why the scaling, when people are asked to scale, we ask them focus on what needs to happen to bring it closer to 10. So as a parent knows what they have to do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Conferences are normally much better. I'll be completely honest. It's more the CIN type level meetings, early help meetings. It's where there isn't a clear plan, and it's those sometimes parents, when they get to a child protection plan, there's because they have to follow. Do you see what I mean? Like, there is that expectation. It's sometimes when the parents don't have that, they don't have that extra pressure on them. Well, everything went really well, is it? I don't know why I'm at this stage. And it's almost like they only hear the positives and they don't hear the negatives. And that's when we sometimes really struggle.
Yeah.
I will take that away. Thank you. I've made a note of that, so we'll take that away. There's several points that we've been able to note down and move away from. Can I just... Oh, okay. I can see somebody's written in the conversation pane around our systems don't talk to one another. I'm just trying to find it. It was further up, I think. Oh, can't find it. Somebody mentioned about, there we go. It is, it was Karina. I can see that you've said there, concerns being recorded and we don't have shared note keeping with the acute hospital or social care. I was just going to add in there that we are currently working on the HIE, so the Health Information Exchange. It is really slow progress, and there's only one other local authority that we can find in the country who's doing this with children's services. But I'd like to think we're moving towards where we will have shared systems and we can see each other note. So that's happening and in hand, but we're not quite there yet, and it will take a while. And obviously there's all sorts of IG things that need to be in place, and made sure that we're going to be compliant. Thank you.
I can't, unless I've completely missed it, so it might just be easier if people shout up or speak up. I can't see anything in the comments that we haven't addressed. If there is, please just let us know, or anyone with their hands up.
Can't
Is
see anybody, Holly? No.
I can see one. Laura, is it
okay.
involves a mental health service to assess the impact of emotional harm on children and within a strategy discussion? Absolutely, no reason why not. It's just shifting that culture, and it sometimes it's the logistics, because obviously in the MASH particularly, they're churning out work, and it's just the logistics of having the right people in the right place at the right time. But let's keep on asking those questions, because that's the direction we need to move towards. If you've got the best information and you know that child and you're best placed, or even if you don't know that child, but if you're best placed and you've got the best information that can contribute to what we need to be doing as the 3 agencies, or even more agencies if they're involved in it as well, then absolutely, Laura, we want to be doing that. Thank you.
right.
Okay.
I think we might have come to a natural conclusion, and I mean, I'll say from my part, and I'll let the others say, I'm really grateful to everybody today. Myself, Ali and Caroline, and with the support of Tracy as well from the SSP, have never done anything like this. It was a bit of a, let's see how it went, let's see who came. If people get value from it, we could absolutely look to do more and find the right people to speak. So if you could take 5 minutes, and maybe just, if you don't want to put it in the comments, I appreciate that, especially if it's constructive feedback. Email Tracy. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. Is there any other subjects that you want to talk about in this sort of environment? Really grateful for your time. I'll back out now and let Ali and Caroline and Tracy say their part.
I just agree with that, Holly, that we'd really like feedback, what you think worked well, what wasn't so well. It's always difficult in the virtual platform, and we 3 haven't sort of really got together, so there was some duplication, but we did feel that was important. So I hope you didn't find that too repetitive, but I think it came from a different angle from each of our agencies. So I hope you'll be able to see that sort of whole picture of where we're coming from when we're talking about neglect. So thank you all.
And I'll just add my thanks as well. It's been really great. I think most of you have stayed with us all the way through, so which is always a good sign. So thank you for that. Collaboration is the way to go. None of us can do this on our own. We can't make changes and support families and ensure the best outcomes for children on our own. None of us can do it. So we've got to be collaborating. So this has been really ideal. And reiterate what Holly said. Please do send in your feedback, because it will shape what we can do next. And we certainly want to do something like this again. So please do let us know. Anyway, over to Tracy. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say thank you, all 3 of you. That was really, really helpful, really interesting webinar, and it was great. It all worked fine. And yeah, just to reiterate, really, to say, yeah, please, people, please give us some feedback. And also, it'd be really helpful to find out if there's anything else that people, any other topics that people want, because we're quite happy to put anything on. Any topics would be really grateful to know from you. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm a bit concerned that I might miss somebody in terms of sending the slides out. So what I'm going to do is create a section on the website under the case review area, which is on themes. And I will put, I think if Holly, Caroline and Ali are in agreement, we'll put the slides there under the theme of neglect, and build up a sort of bank of resources and materials on the website. Okay, but yeah, thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks. Cheers, Tracy.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Hey.
Tracy, do you just want to hang there?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just trying to end the recording.